Previously on Practical Research 1. In the previous modules, we discussed the initial chapters of your qualitative research. In Module 1, we focused on the research introduction, where we gave the context of your research. In Module 2, we built on that context by introducing to you the review of related literature, where you, as researchers, expanded and deepened the discussion regarding the concepts found in your study. Now, moving on, in this module, we will further deepen your study by explaining and enumerating the methodology of research found in Chapter 3. And with that, good day, students, and welcome to Practical Research 1, Lesson 9, Research Methods. For this session, we have the following objectives. First is to identify the different components of Chapter 3. Second is to determine the appropriate research approach for your study. And finally, for number 3, to construct or compose your third chapter. And to do that, we are going to discuss the following topics. First is the research design. Second is the research participants. Third would be your data sources. Number 4 is your data collection procedure, followed by the trustworthiness of the study, and ending with the ethical considerations. So let's begin. Let's talk about an overview of Chapter 3. This chapter contains what many would consider as the technical side of research. And by technical, I mean that this is the aspect or the part of your research where your approach and your subcomponents will be discussed. This chapter is going to give your readers an idea regarding the entire research process, the one that you intend on undergoing. And there are numerous components to this chapter, starting with the research design. So the research design refers to the overall structure that your study is going to take. This is also the basis or your basis as to the manner in which the data will be collected, analyzed, and presented. And this is according to Trokim in 2006. And in general, your research design follows the qualitative research approach because we are, after all, learning about qualitative research in this course. So that is the general research design, the qualitative design. However, as you might have learned in Module 1, Lesson number 3, there are numerous sub-approaches under the qualitative research. And that is the research design that we have to specify in this part of your chapter. What specific sub-approach under the qualitative research paradigm are you going to use? Now, as a form of review, we learned about the 5 common approaches. We have the narrative approach, the ethnographic approach, the grounded theory approach, the case study, and the phenomenological approach. And in this part, there are 2 major components. First is the nature of the research approach, and second is the relevance of the approach to your study. Now, it is up to you as researchers to determine what kind of sub-approach you're going to use. Although, in most cases, especially now during the pandemic, we are focused or we prioritize the kinds of approaches that do not require immersion or that you don't need to be with other people. And that is, or these are, the narrative, case study, and phenomenological approaches. This way you can simply interact with your participants or your respondents from a digital paradigm. So let's talk about the sample research design. Okay, this one is still based on the sample research that we have been using for the past 2 modules. So for the research design, as you may notice, there are 2 paragraphs right here. The first part of the paragraph, or the first paragraph, talks about the explanation of the research approach. So this particular research used the phenomenological research approach. Now, it is going to be up to the researchers to use any material they want to explain the research design or the research approach. However, for this study, they used the definition given by John Creswell. In the next part of the paragraph, you have the relevance of the approach to the study, where the researchers explain how the phenomenological approach functions in their study, or simply put, why they chose the phenomenological approach to begin with. So those are the two components. First, you explain the approach or the design, and second, you're going to explain the relevance of the approach to your research or to your study. Okay, moving on, we have the second part, which is the research participant. So for the research participant, or the research participants or respondents, this is the part where you are going to explain the sampling method as well as the description of the participants that you intend to acquire data from. Now, in any form of research, these participants are most commonly referred to as one of, if not the primary sources of data. So the immediate information, the very necessary data that you will need for your research will be coming from your research participants. Now, in qualitative research, the participants are always selected purposefully. This means that you have identified a certain set of criteria to select your participants. And this is not just a random selection of people coming from a group. So, as such, you must always make sure that in selecting your participants, their expertise and their direct experience regarding the topic are your main considerations. So you don't simply select people out of convenience. Instead, you make sure that you identify participants who can give you the information that you need. Allow me to give you an example. If you're looking for, or if you are conducting a study, a qualitative study about people who suffer from linguistic disabilities, for example, dyslexia, then most likely you are going to need the experiences of a person who suffers from dyslexia, because they are the ones who can paint you a perfect picture regarding this particular research. Okay, so you select a person based on their expertise or their experience, because if you are going to ask a regular person who does not specialize in the treatment or the rehabilitation for dyslexia, or a person who does not suffer from dyslexia, then he or she might not be able to provide you with the information or the data that you need to come up with a definitive conclusion. So in your research paper, this part, the research participants, has two components. First is the discussion of the sampling method, and the second one is the description of your intended participants. So allow me to give you a sample. Okay, in the first paragraph, the researchers talked about the sampling method, and in the second paragraph, the researchers discussed the description of the participants. Okay, so you have to tell your readers your criteria for selecting your participants. Okay, next we have your data sources. Okay, from data sources, this refers to the materials or the people which or who will provide you with the information you need in order to answer your research questions. Now, in research, there are numerous types of data sources, probably two general types, the primary and the secondary. But we will begin with the most common terms. And these are primary and secondary. Okay, these are the data sources. When we talk about the primary data sources, these are the origins of your main information. For example, if you're looking at the experience of your participants, then it will be your participants who will be the main sources or the primary data sources. The secondary data source would be the supporting materials, which can enhance or validate or deepen your primary data. For example, if you want to look at the lived experiences of those who have dyslexia, then probably your primary data sources would be the people suffering from dyslexia. As your secondary data source, probably you can refer to the expertise of those who specialize in treating or rehabilitating dyslexia. So this is a way for you to validate and enhance the impact of your primary data. Can you have supporting evidences such as documents and such? Yes. You may use documents or pertinent documents in order to enhance the primary data. But we have to make sure that your primary data is a very rich source of information. So the discussion of the data sources has two parts. First is the description of the data that you need in your study. And the second one is the description of the primary and secondary sources of data. Allow me to exemplify. So in this example, the first paragraph talks about the description of the data that the researchers needed for this study. While in the second paragraph, they told you about the description of the data source. So they needed to describe the sources of their data, both primary and secondary. Okay, moving on, we have the data collection procedure where you are going to enumerate how your data is going to be collected. So this is the process of collecting your data, starting from the preparation of the research instrument, your interview guide, your probing questions and such, leading to the actual process of collecting the data. Now, make sure that you follow the correct sequence of the steps. What do I mean by this? It means that before you can interview, before you can collect your data, you first have to come up with a research instrument. It's not the other way around, that you collect data first and then develop the instrument later. No, it has to be in a logical order. You begin with the preparation of the research instrument. You go to the acquisition of permission from your participants, the parents if necessary, and then you proceed to the collection of your data, which eventually leads you to the analysis of that data. So allow me to give you an example. The first paragraph here talks about the description of the preparation of the research instrument, while the second part talks about the description of the post-collection process, what they will do with the data once it has been collected. Okay, so moving on, we have the trustworthiness of the study, and this has 4 measures. Okay, we have credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. To give you an idea, credibility is the first criterion for trustworthiness, and we have to establish that your study is very trustworthy for it to be valid. So credibility refers to the ability of the researchers to connect the findings and the results of the study to real life events or to real life scenarios. In order to do that, okay, we have to come up with certain techniques. And just two of the most common techniques would be triangulation and member checking. Triangulation is the method of using multiple means of data collection, which means that aside from your initial way of acquiring data, such as an interview, you also employ other means of collecting data. For some, they might use participant observation, wherein the researchers will observe the behavior of the research participants. That could be one other aspect. Okay, so you employ three means of data collection, and then you triangulate. What does triangulation mean? It means that you're going to connect their statements from the interview, your observations of these participants, and then probably the results of the third method of data collection. So you're going to put these observations, these results, these statements together and see if you can come up with an explanation for all three. On the other hand, member checking, the second technique, is done by allowing the participants to check the results before they are published. So sometimes when we get excited, we immediately publish the results without consulting the participants first. We have to make sure that their preference in terms of the extent of publishing their statements is respected. So we do that by member checking. Once we are done with the transcription of the interview, we can show the results of the transcription to your participants and see if they want to retain, change, or omit some parts of their statements, because it is their right to do that. And this is according to statistics solutions. Okay, now in writing this part, you need to explain how you are going to connect the results to actual facts. What you did to make sure that your results are not made up and are not fabricated. So this one is a sample credibility. Okay, this is going to show you how the researchers aimed or sought to ensure credibility. You may pause this video if you want to read the entire paragraph. Okay, next we have transferability. Yeah, transferability is the extent to which the results of the research may be transferred or applicable in a different research context. As an example, the results of a research conducted in the field of psychology may be transferred in the field of education. So this is just applying the method employed in one research, or the results taken from one research, and then applying it in another field. So as exemplified here, a research in psychology may be used as basis in a research done in the field of education, vice versa, and probably other allied fields of knowledge. So one can ensure transferability by making sure that the research context is well defined. You describe the context of your research, where you are coming from. And this one is based on your background of the study and your related literature. So this part contains the discussion of why the degree of transferability of the results. Okay, so how transferable are these data or these pieces of information, and this degree of transferability is highlighted, okay, after the collection of your data. Now this is a sample paragraph for transferability. Again, you can pause this video if you want to read through the paragraph. Next, we have dependability, and this has something to do with documenting the changes that the study may encounter along the way. In the field of qualitative research, it is common knowledge that along the way, the researchers might encounter changes or might implement changes in the study in order to fit the ever volatile nature of research. And should these changes happen, then these changes must be documented by the researchers. What type of change am I referring to? Well, I'll give you one example. Sometimes a researcher may use a research instrument as the initial data collection method. However, this method might not be very applicable to some of the participants. Okay, so at some point in the research, the researcher said, I want to shift to a focused group discussion instead of a one-on-one interview so that I can see the proper context of the participants. Well, this change must be documented. That at some point, the researcher shifted from initially planning on using the interview method to the focused group discussion method. That's just one example. So we have to document these changes. Okay, and aside from documenting these changes, we also have to indicate how these changes can impact the study. So if you shift from an interview-based collection to a focused group discussion collection, what changes could the readers expect or could the researchers expect? So this is just one example of dependability. Again, you can pause the video if you wish. Lastly, we have confirmability, and this is the extent to which the data can be checked, validated, or corroborated by other people. Again, this has something to do with validating the responses. So some of the ways to do this would be to document the process of data collection by recording your interviews or recording or via video the interview sessions or the focus group discussions. You also have to present the transcription of the interviews or even to intentionally look for errors or negative instances in the study. So you have to sift through your material and look for errors so that you can correct them. Another alternative would be to conduct data audit where a researcher accounts for bias in the data. We check if some of the discussions, some of the conclusions favor one party. Because as you know, in research, we have to be objective. So this is just a sample paragraph. Again, you can pause the video if you want to read through it. Now, proceeding to the last portion, we have the ethical considerations. And simply put, these are just the different ethical practices that you will be observing during the conduct of the research. So this makes sure that all the rights of your participants are observed and respected. So the most common considerations are, number one, keeping the anonymity of the participants. We never divulge their identities. Second, would be the validation of the responses. This is via the transcription. So before publishing your results, your participants must sign off on the transcription. They must take a look at their statements, and if they want to change some of the statements, then they can do so. That is their right. And lastly, we have the issuance of permission letters. So before we engage in data collection, we have to secure the permission of the participants at the very start. Okay? This should not be done at the end of the research. Instead, they must be informed of their rights at the beginning of the data collection procedure. If they want to back out, then they can do so. You cannot do anything about it. So this is a sample paragraph. If you want to read through it, then you can just pause this video. Okay, I believe that would be all for this afternoon. We have discussed at length the different components of Chapter 3, and I hope that this video has been helpful to you. Once again, this has been Sir Dardar. I'll see you in the next video. Class dismissed.